Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to some more StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void. Now over the last couple of weeks I've been uploading quite a couple of games regarding Zerg vs Terran and Zerg vs Zerg as well, but very little Zerg vs Protoss. And I gotta be honest, I also think Zerg vs Protoss is actually the matchup that has developed a ton, especially in comparison to Heart of the Swarm. In Heart of the Swarm and also in Wings of Liberty we saw a ton of 2-base all-ins, and while those definitely aren't gone, it seems like a lot of Protoss players are risking the more macro-focused approach, and you know, also in this game. So I got a relatively long game for you for Zerg vs Protoss sake. This is going to be a Protoss player that will take a very quick third base, and we're going to be watching this game from the entirety from the point of view that I saw at the time as well. Now, I am by no means a perfect Zerg player whatsoever. I mean, I make mistakes all the time, I shall clearly see in this game as well. So, you know, let's hope we learn something from it together, both me and you. So, Zerg vs Protoss is an interesting matchup as of late, because pretty much every single Zerg unit and every single Protoss unit seems to have their chance to basically shine on the battlefield. And most importantly, Zerg players are all of a sudden able to open up extremely greedy. Most of the Protoss players are opening up with a Nexus first, or with like a gateway Nexus into Cybernetics core, so a relatively late Cybernetics core. And in general, there's very little cheese going on. The main reason for that is that if you manage to actually, for example, do like a cannon rush versus a Zerg player, they can just simply follow it up with a Nidus Worm and likely kill you straight up. And for that very reason, the only way you can really deal damage early on as a Protoss player is if you will proxy multiple gateways. Now, as you may have noticed, we're playing on a 4-player map right here, which sort of completely excludes that option unless he wants to put like 3 gateways in the middle of the map and then sort of starts chrono boosting Zealots out and just gets a really messy game going. So most of the time, in almost every single scenario, at least on my league, it is totally viable to open up with triple hatch before making a spawning pool. That's exactly what I'm doing. Now, I've been watching quite a lot of pro gamers play, and they seem to delay their gases a lot. So this is actually one of the first games where I do give that a try, and I actually don't go for the gases until like 36, 40-ish supply, and then I take 2 at the same time. And it feels a lot like playing Zerg vs Terran back in Heart of the Swarm, where you would open up with Hatchery first as well, and then go into a bunch of queens, and then actually go ahead and get the gases much later, and actually also on Wings of Liberty. But this is something that is relatively normal right now in ZVP rather. So because of the early game economy, I'm now also able to afford 3 queens, and I'm gonna be making a relatively big amount of Zerglings. The reason behind those Zerglings is not just to try and be annoying to my opponent, but to also stop any kind of potential adept aggression. Right now, it's very popular for Protoss players to open up with like a double gateway, and then go for like triple, or sometimes 2 or sometimes 4 adepts, just to try and be annoying to the Zerg and, you know, one-shot workers. It takes 2 adepts to one-shot a worker, and most of the time they try and do some aggression with that. So I'm making those. However, since I got them out already, I figure since I now know that my opponent is on the other side of the map, or, you know, at least on the left side of the map, I can try and do a little bit of damage. So what I'm gonna do is actually make a whole bunch of Zerglings and move across the map, but sort of dodge the middle part of it, so that if my opponent is indeed going for adepts, I'm able to run by them. I'm also following this up with triple gas geysers, because I do plan on going for a little bit of aggression. So the aggression that I'm talking about is actually a Roach Warren warping in, or not warping in, merging, no, what is it? Morphing in Roaches, and then following it up with a couple of Ravagers. And that's really what the early game Zerg is all about. But here we go. I find my opponent already having a 3rd base up. That is extremely greedy and extremely uncommon. But after scouting that, you know, I was going for a very aggressive 3rd base myself, he was like, well, you know, I'm just gonna make a 3rd Nexus. And honestly, at this point in time, it worked out just fine, because since the mothership now can actually overcharge pylons, it all of a sudden means that Zerg has to put out a significant amount of units to really do any kind of aggression. However, I did follow this up with a Roach Warren. I also follow it up with Zergling speed, and after making a couple of workers, I will start making an army. So this is one of those things that I'm personally not really used to yet. I usually play a very passive style, especially back in the day in Heart of the Swarm, for example. I would basically try and squeeze out as many workers as possible, analyze what kind of play my opponent would be going for, and then respond to like his 2-base all-in as his 3rd base expansion accordingly. But since as of Legacy of the Void, everything is sort of all over the place, it is very viable for a Zerg player to go for aggression, especially if your opponent has a 3rd base up. Then again, I am making Zerglings right now. I already am producing roaches as well. A whole bunch of them are out already. I need to make sure I do damage with this. And that's the one thing I always find a little bit scary. Since I stopped droning much sooner, I mean, I only made 50 workers in total here. I stopped droning much sooner. I need to do damage with this. If I don't do sufficient amounts of damage with this aggression, I know very well that I'm likely gonna be in trouble. However, this sort of also helps a lot against potential 2 base all-ins that my opponent could be going for, which, like I said, are still relatively common. If my opponent is going for a 2 base all-in, I'm already blindly making an army because I'm planning on doing aggression myself. I'm in a very happy position, and oftentimes we do run into like Immortals when getting across the map, which is just a straight up win. Or my opponent could be going for some type of a depth play or whatever, but either way, it is very, very, very good right now to go for the Zerglings and Ravagers. The main reason why that is the case is because of the new Adepts. Adepts are very good at cleaning up Zerglings, for example, but not so good against cleaning up the Adept, or the Ravagers rather. Ravagers are great. They do a lot of damage. And you can force the Terran or the Protoss player to get out of position, just like you can in Zerg vs Terran as well. Now, there is an Adept actually warped into my 4th base. He's gonna try and do whatever damage he can, but in the meantime, I'm just gonna try and do as much damage as possible. Most of the time though, you don't want to stick around on this army composition, because if your opponent gets a big army out, just Ravagers are not gonna cut it against the Protoss. And obviously once they get a big enough army, for example with Disruptors, or they go for Colossus, or even, you know, like pretty much anything, if they go Mass Adept even, they can stop these sort of builds with relative ease. However, I will be switching into another army composition, but not before doing sufficient amounts of damage. And I am just trying to push as aggressively as I possibly can at this point in time. Now, the probes are being pulled off the line. A lot of those will end up falling, but I know that my opponent is warping in a ton of units as well. So I'm obviously going to continue my injects right here, trying to make as many units as I possibly can. 4th base is already about to get finished up, and I could decide right now to follow this up with, you know, anything really. I have different kinds of options. However, since my opponent decided to go for a Stargate, I already can see that there is a you know, Oracle in the air as well as a Void Ray. I am fully aware that most of the time, if this is the case, my opponent will eventually be able to clean this up. So I stopped with the aggression, or at least I should really stop with the aggression and switch into something else. Lair is very late though. I should be getting that much sooner. I didn't kill the 4th or the 3rd base of my opponent. As you can see, it is still very much so in very high amounts of health, which is just not very useful for me. And at this moment in time, I'm not 100% sure if I'm actually ahead. Now, if you take a look at the income tab, as you can see, I did a relatively big amount of damage, and I did deal, you know, a relatively big amount of it. But I think with some more focused attacks and potentially cutting workers slightly sooner, I will be able to just straight up stop this this 3rd base from, you know, basically staying up, and then potentially grabbing the drones back a little sooner as well, without committing too much into like a second timing wave. There's a lot of wiggle room right here where I could still be improving. Now, I am going to follow this up with melee upgrades and the Spire. One of the things that I don't really like about Zerg vs Protoss is how it feels when I play with a maxed out army versus Protoss. It oftentimes feels like I can't really engage them head on because of Disruptors. Disruptors, I have a very hard time microing against them. They're very, very good. They blow up all my Zerg stuff, and then I get a little bit salty. So most of the time, I tend to switch into an army composition where either I can completely crush them, for example with Ultralisks and Broodlords, or I switch into something such as Zergling and Mutalisks, that I can basically use to counter-attack constantly and never really engage the Protoss army, which is always a great option. And since I have the 4 bases right now with the 8 gases in total, I figured that would be the correct option. Now, I'm still having a small army left to do a little bit of pressuring with. I'm getting +1/+1, like I mentioned, for this melee upgrades, and I do plan on transitioning towards Ultralisk eventually. Now, at this point in time, as you may have noticed on the production tab, my opponent is warping in Dark Templar. And Dark Templar, they haven't changed since Wings of Liberty. They're still a completely annoying, you know, sons of bitches pretty much, because they will go ahead and wreck your day. And in this game, they do nothing else either. I did get detection in all of my bases, but since they're relatively good at cleaning up, you know, any kind of buildings, if you manage to get them close to it, you're gonna be in a ton of trouble. So now that my my Spire is finished up, I'm gonna be starting the Infestation Pit, start up a whole bunch of Mutalisk here as well, just to try and do as much as possible, but the Dark Templar are already in my third. I'm trying to desperately morph in a whole bunch of army, but since that Spore Crawler ends up falling there, I'm gonna be losing the fourth base most likely if I do not get enough army over there in time. I immediately do decide to take another base, but it's already too late. The thing is down. I do end up killing all of the Dark Templar, which is actually a big deal because Dark Templar, like, those cost a lot more than that Hatchery cost me. But obviously it cuts out a lot of mining time right now for me. And income wise, while we do have more workers than him, and while we do have slightly more income, it's not as great as it could have been when we had that fourth base up and mining. So I'm starting to get multiple bases. I'm also gonna go ahead and start scouting about and see what my opponent is going for. Don't really have much vision of his fourth base actually. This is huge for me. I should really be checking around the map a lot more aggressively and maybe put some units over there, but it doesn't matter at this point in time because I'm just gonna start head-on engaging the Protoss army. And while I do want to engage this Protoss army right now, normally I'm a little bit more hesitant about it. You may be wondering, why do you do it right now? Well, the main reason for that is because I managed to do a lot of damage early on. If I wouldn't have been able to do so much damage to his fourth base and his third base rather earlier into this game, I likely would have been, you know, sitting back a lot more. And even at this point in time, I still think it would have been better for me to just simply sit back for a little while longer, just because I do end up losing quite a significant amount of my army there, but most importantly all of my Mutalisk. I don't actually have that many mutas anymore, so there's still like a lot of wiggle room for improvement there as well, with the engagements and the different kinds of timings that you can try and hit when you play versus Protoss. But the main thing that I do know at this point in time is that I managed to keep the Protoss back. I killed most of his army. I know fully well that he's not gonna have a big army all of a sudden, you know, slamming at my fourth base or whatever. And most of the aggression that he can do comes from Dark Templar. Now I did do a bit of a scout around in the top left corner of the map to try and figure out where those Dark Templar came from. Didn't really find any kind of pylons. And actually, if you take a look at the everyone cam right now, I see that there's still a couple of Dark Templar here and there trying to be annoying, but all in all, I do manage to clean up the fourth base of my Protoss opponent right here, that he is forced to cancel. And at that point, I also have a Overlord pooping some creep over to it. But at this point, I know I'm in a pretty good position. So, while my economy never was the biggest, I've managed to keep the Protoss army small. And one thing that is true for Protoss armies, ever since Wings of Liberty, is that they need to be in a big group in order to be efficient, right? If I manage to clean up the Protoss units one by one, and I will eventually be able to establish my economy, that is fine by me. So at this point, I am starting up my Ultralisk Cavern. I got the Adrenal Glands upgrade coming in for the Zerglings, which I know will absolutely shred through those Stalkers that he has, giving the Zerglings an additional 40% attack speed opposed to the 18% it was in the past. Absolutely huge upgrade. And at this point, I'm just trying to establish a big economy. I've been denying my opponent armies for a long time. However, if he manages to sit for a little while longer and he just manages to get like a big clump of Protoss stuff out, I can still be in a ton of trouble. But as you can see, if you watch my games in Heart of the Swarm of Zerg vs Protoss, you probably have never seen me play this aggressively and this often on the other side of the map. I tend to like sit back a lot more. But this style, honestly, if you don't play it already or you don't play an aggressive style already versus Protoss in Legacy, I would highly recommend it. It's a ton of fun, but it's also, I think, the correct way to play currently. Either way though, I am getting all of my upgrades right now, the +3/+3. I'm trying to make sure that my opponent doesn't kill all of my workers while actually pulling my entire army back home. Ugh. Unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. I could have probably cancelled his fourth base with this stuff that I got going on, even though his army was right here. I could have at the very least tried. Very silly by me to pull the entire army back home. But I was getting a little bit flustered by the Dark Templar. But definitely, like, playing aggressive right now in Legacy of the Void is great. So in this specific game, I went for Ravagers and Zerglings early on, into a switch to Mutalisk with Zerglings. And then I actually could also go for Infestors. I could be going for even Swarmice. I could be going for Lurkers. I could be going for more Ravagers and Zerglings. I could be going for Hydralisk. Could be going for Corruptors with Broodlords. I could be going for, you know, Ultralisk, like I'm going in this specific game. There's countless different options, and the middle part of the game is really where the meta opens up. However, these Zerglings right now are in stasis. This is a new ability on the Oracle. As I'm sure most of you are aware, they cannot be attacked at the moment, but if they get stuck around all of these Stalkers, I'm in a terrible position. However, I look at this army and I'm like, that doesn't seem like a lot of stuff. Let's just engage this head on now that the Adrenal Glands has finished up full of the Zerglings. And as you can see, they're absolutely shredding through. Magic boxing above those Oracles to make sure that my Mutalisks do not take the splash damage from this army. Ultralisk moving in as well. It looks like they're on their rollerblades once again, which is some sort of bug with replays in the Legacy of the Void expansion. As you can see, like, they're just sliding along. I thank God, though, they do a lot of damage. And my opponent is slowly but surely losing most of his army once again. I'm reinforcing with more Ultralisk, reinforcing with more and more Zerglings. But somehow, some way, I didn't quite manage to do, you know, enough damage to kill that 4th base. At this point in time, though, I've established my own 5th. And I'm trying to just make sure that I get a lot of extra minerals out. I also don't actually have that many drones in total. I should have probably gone up to like 85 workers or something just to establish like a good mineral lead. Because as you can see at this point in time, I have 145 supply, but a lot of banked up gas. And that's not really what you want. Normally, gas is the limiting factor. And if it's not, you just simply don't have enough workers on your bases. And I just really can't spend it at this point in time. So I'm going to switch back into a lot of Mutalisk just because I know my opponent is likely going to be making Immortals, which is this mind game that's going on. He sees Zerglings and he sees Ultralisk, right? The only way he's gonna kill Ultralisk is with Immortals. Immortals die to Zerglings, but also to Mutalisk, so he's likely gonna switch into something that has splash damage for the Zerglings, something like Archons, and then also Immortals, right? So I'm trying to basically mind game him into thinking that I'm going for more Immortals while I'm actually going for Mutalisk and Zergling, and there's this silly mind game going on, but all in all, there's just countless of different attack paths in Zerg vs Protoss, tons of you know, timing attacks with also the new War Prism having its place, and just tons and tons of different options for both of the races to be completely annoying to the opponent. So I'm gonna be moving in with my main army. I got a whole bunch of Zerglings ready on the prowl as well at his 3rd base. I'm gonna try to do a lot of damage to that base, and actually, I believe I actually right-click on it just to ensure that I am doing maximum amount of damage to it. Having a couple of Mutas out right now as well that are trying to do damage, but these Zerglings, as you can see, like, just look at the damage of Adrenal Gland Zerglings with +3 attack, okay? The Nexus right here is falling so extremely quickly that just a small group of Zerglings can clean up a Nexus in a matter of seconds if the Protoss is caught off guard. And while there are also more of these stasis wards, I check really quickly to check whether or not my opponent has another base going up. After analyzing that that is not the case, I'm just simply gonna A-move onwards while trying to pull his army out of position with the Mutalisk that I still have out. Making more and more of them, since my opponent is forced right now to make Immortals as well as Stalkers, the Mutas are gonna be a great choice. And even though, you know, Stalkers are good against Mutas in small numbers, once there's a lot of them, the Mutas become extremely powerful, especially in combination with Zerglings, as well as the Mutalisk attack upgrades. So the attack upgrades, I'm about to finish up +3, or +3 only, actually, not +3 armor yet, but I'm just making a big army. My opponent is forced to shove across the map, and I have 2 options right now. Always an option in Zerg vs Protoss. You can go for the counter attack, which is great, or you can look at his army and be like, I could probably take that head on. And I'm gonna go for option 2 right here, trying to make sure I don't lose all of my stuff to the oracles, or to the Archons rather, and I'm just trying to nuke through whatever my opponent has left over, knowing that I just killed his 3rd base, knowing that he doesn't have a 5th base, and knowing that this is likely going to be his last-ditch effort. I do manage to clean up his army, and my opponent says GG. So I hope you enjoyed watching this longer game of Zerg vs Protoss. If you haven't already, let me know down below in the comment section whether or not you want to see more of those longer games. I tend to upload a lot of games around 10 or so minutes, although obviously I get just as many, you know, games that go on to like 15 to 20 minutes or so. So if you're interested in seeing more of those, let me know down below the like button so I know, you know, whether or not you want to see more so I can upload them. But either way, I want to thank you all for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!